Edvard Munch is one of the pioneers of modern art and is considered a forerunner of Expressionism. Today, he is the most internationally famous Norwegian visual artist. Even more famous than Munch perhaps is his picture The Scream, which from the time of his death has often been presented as an image of collective angst and uncertainty. The motif has throughout the years continued its gradual passage into the sphere of popular culture through countless adaptations and caricatures. Today, The Scream is known all around the world. But let's go back to the beginning. Edvard Munch is born on the 12th of December 1863 on Engelau Farm in Løten, a small agricultural village 125 kilometers north of Christiania. Only a year later, the family moves to the capital, where they live in several different locations during the course of Edvard's childhood. When his mother dies in 1868, his aunt takes over responsibility for the household and the children. Edvard's interest in drawing is awakened already in his early childhood, inspired by his aunt. Together with his siblings, Munch creates vignettes, doodles and whimsical drawings and illustrations for the compositions and short stories in the schoolbooks. "16 years old, Edvard Munch starts studying engineering, but 1 year later he decides to become an artist instead and takes up artistic training at the Royal College of Design in Christiania. At the same time, he works avidly on his own, producing watercolors and drawings of his home, and drawings, sketches, and small oil paintings from his wanderings around the city and in the countryside. He also creates portraits of family members. In 1882, he rents a studio together with 6 other artist peers in a building called Pultosten near Stortingsplass, and receives guidance from the elder painter Christian Krogh. Together with his fellow artists, he visits exhibitions systematically, where they view works by the naturalist painters of the period, such as Fritz Thaulow, Eilif Pettersen, and Erik Wernskjold. In 1883, Edvard Munch participates in an exhibition for the first time, and in subsequent years, he exhibits regularly in the annual autumn exhibition. Funded by a private grant, he embarks on a study tour to Antwerp in 1885, where he exhibits a picture in the World Fair, and then on to Paris to visit the Louvre and the Salon. Here, he becomes influenced by the new art of the times. Certain critics are positively inclined towards Munch's works, but many are outspokenly negative towards the sketch-like and unfinished quality of Munch's paintings. This criticism reaches a peak when he exhibits The Sick Child at the annual autumn exhibition in 1886. The picture is a profoundly personal and subjective recollection of his sister's death a few years earlier, rendered in a radically new painterly style. Criticism of this unfinished and incomplete style will continue to follow Munch throughout his entire artistic career. In 1885, Munch meets the controversial leader of the Christiania Bohemians, the writer and anarchist Hans Jäger, and the two develop a close friendship. Jäger's command, "Thou shalt write thy own life," spurs Munch to compose autobiographical literary texts and prose poems in the years to come. In 1889, Edvard Munch arranges his first extensive solo exhibition in Christiania and is simultaneously awarded the government scholarship for artists, which he also receives the following 2 years. He travels to Paris and studies in the studio of Léon Bonnat. In the art metropolis, he encounters the works of the young radical artists of the period, impressionists such as Monet, Pissarro, and Seurat, and synthetists such as Gauguin, Van Gogh, and Bernard. In Christiania and Paris, Munch develops friendships with neo-romantic poets such as Wilhelm Krag, Sigbjørn Obstfelder, and the Danish poet Emanuel Goldstein. Munch has now begun working on his own literary notes and prose poems. From Paris, he travels southwards to Nice, where he stays for a lengthy period in order to work on his own sketches and studies. Here, he paints scenes from the promenade and the beach and impromptu scenes from the roulette table at the casino, while simultaneously developing many of the same motifs in his literary texts. In the pictures from this period, he experiments with different impressionist techniques. After yet another extensive solo exhibition in Christiania in 1892, where Munch shows works from his study tours abroad, he receives an unexpected invitation to exhibit at the Berlin Art Association. The exhibition leads to a deep rift among the members of the association, and it is closed down after only a few days. Munch has become both infamous and famous overnight, and immediately sends the exhibition on tour to a number of cities in Germany before it returns to be shown once again in Berlin. Munch settles in the German capital and associates with the leading young German and Scandinavian artists and writers of the circle connected to the wine bar Zum Schwarzen Ferkel, where August Strindberg and the Polish writer Stanislaw Trzebiszewski are among the prominent figures. In Berlin, Munch works intensely on a series of pictures with motifs related to the fundamental human experiences of love, angst, and death. Trzebiszewski publishes the first book about the painter, and in the subsequent years, Munch actively engages his writer and journalist friends in promoting his art. In Berlin, he also tries his hand as a printmaker, and in the spring of 1894, he makes his first etchings. In 1896, Edvard Munch travels from Berlin to Paris, where he continues to experiment with other graphic techniques, primarily lithography and woodcut. He tests various color techniques, and with the woodcut, explores alternatives and makes puzzles, as well as more simple compositions out of the woodblocks. As a printmaker, Munch has remained standing as an important and innovative figure in the history of modern art. In his graphic works, Munch varies and develops many of the same motifs as in his paintings, and as he observes, they are connected through their inner content as well as in their formal means.
When they were positioned together, there immediately arose a resonance between them, and they became entirely different, and when displayed individually, it became a symphony. That is when I decided to paint friezes.
He calls this series of pictures that depict scenes and tableaux from the life cycle of human beings the frieze of life. In 1898, Edvard Munch purchases a small fisherman's cabin in Åsgårdstrand, a coastal town with whitewashed houses where he had spent many summers since his youth. The undulating coastline and the bright summer nights were very important for Munch's artistic development. Many of the motifs in the frieze of life were conceived and developed here. In the house and garden, he finds peace and quiet to work, and he finds respite during difficult times. At the Berlin secession in 1902 and the following year in Leipzig, Edvard Munch exhibits a complete frieze for the first time. Recognition in Germany leads to new commissions and projects, and he gradually acquires a large network of art dealers, gallery owners, writers and patrons who are consistently engaged in his art. "My fame follows its own path like a snowplow," he writes in a letter to a friend. Commissioned by the eye specialist Max Linder in Lübeck, he paints a frieze for the children's nursery and a large group portrait of Linder's 4 sons. He receives a number of portrait commissions from among the circle of leading German cultural figures associated with the Nietzsche byarkiv in Weimar, and also paints a monumental posthumous portrait of Friedrich Nietzsche for the Swedish banker Ernest Thiel. Commissioned by the famous theatre director Max Reinhardt, Munch paints a decorative frieze for the intimate theatre hall in Deutsches Theater in Berlin, and he makes set designs for the opening performance of Ghosts by Henrik Ibsen. Disheartened by a doomed love affair, alcohol abuse, and enormous work pressure, he decides to stay for an extended period in Warnemünde on the Baltic coast in an attempt to lead a healthier lifestyle and gather strength. During this period, he develops a new and more life-affirming idiom. He paints monumental pictures of bathing men on the beach, and he works on yet another picture series called The Green Room. During these years, he also arranges a long line of exhibitions in Germany, Scandinavia, and in Central Europe. After an extended period of treatment in a private clinic in Copenhagen, Edvard Munch returns to Norway in May 1909, settling in the coastal town of Kragerø, where he rents the small holding Skrubben. The following year, he purchases the shoreline property Nedre Ramme in Hvitsten, and in both locations he erects large outdoor studios in order to work on his monumental paintings for the competition to decorate the University of Oslo's Festival Hall in honor of its centennial anniversary in 1911. In search of new motifs, Munch explores Kragerø's hills and knolls lined with terraced houses and pine groves, and its snow-clad skerries in the winter light. In Hvitsten, he paints numerous pictures of the naked rocks and bathers with brightly colored expressive brushstrokes. And the landscapes of these two locations are also rendered in a lifelike manner in the three monumental paintings of the university decorations: History, Alma Mater, and the Sun. Munch has now gained greater recognition in Norway. In 1909, the National Gallery acquires a number of his major works for its collections, and the entrepreneur Rasmus Meyer in Bergen systematically acquires Munch pictures with the intention of establishing his own art museum. In 1912, Edvard Munch participates as an honorary exhibitor alongside of Picasso, Cézanne, Van Gogh, and Gauguin in the groundbreaking exhibition Sonderbund in Cologne, thus consolidating his position as a model for many young European artists. Munch would himself be influenced by the new generation throughout the 1920s and 30s. The following year, Munch rents Grimsrød Estate in Moss, where he concentrates on printmaking, and paints the view overlooking the agricultural landscape at Jeløya and the factory workers on the way home at the end of the day. Edvard Munch has now completed the university decorations, which after many diversions and postponements is finalized in 1916. That same year, he purchases the property Ekely in Skøyen on the outskirts of Christiania. Here, he constructs outdoor studios, large studios in wood and a studio built of brick, serving as a place to work during the winter months. He begins an extensive painterly exploration of his close surroundings and the unique features of the property: the apple orchard, the elm grove through the seasons, the park and flower garden, and the view overlooking snow-clad fields in the moonlight. He paints a number of self-portraits, portraits of visitors, and numerous female nudes. He is also fascinated by and paints the animals on the small holding: the horse, his own dogs, and the neighbor's ferocious canine beast. In the outdoor and wooden studios, he develops and experiments further with the frieze of life and other monumental ideas. In 1921, he paints a frieze commissioned by the Freia chocolate factory for its workers' cafeteria, where many of the motifs are brighter and simpler variations of the motifs taken from the frieze of life and other earlier friezes. In 1927, the most extensive retrospective exhibition of Munch's works to date is shown in the National Gallery in Berlin, and later the same year in the National Gallery in Oslo, with great success. In Germany, Munch buys a small film camera, which he enthusiastically tries out. When he sustains a serious eye injury in the beginning of the 1930s, he registers almost scientifically the course of the illness and the shadow images that appears on the retina of the eyes in numerous watercolors, drawings, and notes. During the same period, he takes a series of striking photographic self-portraits. In honor of Munch's 70th birthday in 1933, Jens Thies, the director of the National Gallery and Munch's old friend, publishes the most extensive book to date about Munch's life and art. To commemorate the National Gallery's 100th anniversary in 1937, Thies has a new Munch room built in the museum. That same year, 82 works by Munch in German museums are confiscated by the Nazis and designated as entartet, or degenerate. When the German troops invade Norway in 1940, Munch is living an alienated and reclusive existence at Ekeli, and during the war years he is constantly worried about the safety of his works of art. In the wake of the Great Explosion at the Philipsstad Wharf, on December 19, 1943, he wanders about his property in a state of distress and agitation, thereby catching a cold that he never recovers from. He dies peacefully in his home at Ekeli on January 23, 1944. In his will, dated 18 April 1940, he leaves his works of art to the municipality of Oslo.